Hello, I'm Adam Corbin, a partner at Michelmores, and I'm hosting this series of podcasts released in the run-up to the Cereals Arable event at Thoresbury Estate in Nottinghamshire on the 13th and 14th of June this year. These podcasts accompany a series of articles which you can access on our website. We'll be at the show with our stand, looking forward to meeting and speaking to friends old and new, hopefully over a cake, gin or ice cream. This time we're going to be speaking about insect farming, and I'm joined by two fantastic lawyers from Michelmores, Rachel O'Connor and Chloe Vernon-Shaw, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves, starting with Rachel.
Hello, thank you, Adam. I'm Rachel O'Connor, a lawyer at Michelmores, specialising in agriculture. I've got a particular focus on sustainable agriculture and a real keenness in terms of insects and their role as an alternative source of protein as well, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I think you forgot, Adam, that we're also going to have some tasty insect treats at the stand in cereals as well at some point.
Yes, they're at our Women in Rural Practice event, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to partake of them. I'll just have to hope that you leave some left over afterwards.
We'll save you some.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I am, as of 2 days ago, a partner in the Michelmores commercial team. I specialise in tech and innovation traditionally, but I've been recently using my commercial skills in the natural capital sector and the commoditisation of natural capital, which is all part of the green finance and overarching sustainable economy, which this plays heavily into.
Well, congratulations, Chloe. I have to say that I thought you were already a partner, to be honest. So, Rachel, set the scene for us. What is insects as feed or insect farming, and what's it all about?
I think that we've somewhere missed the incredible potential that insects have in our food system to tackle so many things that we're faced with at the moment. Climate change, biodiversity loss, nutrition, and also waste reduction. Insects are fundamentally key to ensuring that we have a circular economy. Land use in particular is one that on an island such as the UK or GB, we really struggle with, and we have to prioritise. And there's never been so much demand, particularly in recognising the benefits of our countryside and natural capital. We need to make sure that we're using land really efficiently. 40% of the UK's entire arable land area is used for crops to feed animals, and insects provide a fantastic source of protein in animal feed. So it would be great if we could use that as a means of freeing up some of our land for use for growing crops for ourselves, for example. And I've just touched on climate change. There was a report produced some years ago by an organisation called ProTinsect, which assessed that we import about 80% of our protein for animal feed from outside of Europe, mainly from South America, mainly soya, which is linked to deforestation, a huge contributor to climate change. So this is the potential to reduce the amount of soya that we're importing.
So this sounds all very innovative and new, Rachel.
I don't think it's new. I think that we're having a bit of an awakening as to the role that insects have to play and that they have been performing for millennia. For all of our incredible advances in food production, we've somewhere along the way forgotten about the incredible role that insects play in the food chain as converters of organic waste into high quality protein. Insects are the start and the end of the food chain, and they turn what would otherwise be waste, and there's no such thing as waste in nature, of course, into protein, providing valuable nutrition for other species. Even insect frass, which is insect poo, has been shown to be a great soil conditioner and fertiliser, and that's already been recognised at an EU level where they've introduced legislation specifically for managing frass in anticipation of the role that it will play as a really valuable byproduct of the insect protein industry.
Can I just jump in and say, I guess in the whole of the world, it's not a new or novel thing at all. Other people eat insects and use insects as feed on a completely unnovel way.
Yeah, absolutely. We're somewhat behind the curve in that way.
And so it's not all about delicious salty bar snacks and insect burgers.
No, definitely not. Although having eaten all of those, they're definitely a good argument as to why we as humans should be eating them. And they're certainly great from a sustainability point of view. And as Chloe mentioned, there's also quite extensive research into how widely insects are already consumed globally. The nutritional profile of them, they're incredibly high in protein, key amino acids, as well as other vitamins. But the use of insects for animal feed is really just as interesting, particularly when, understandably, there remains a considerable amount of reluctance in Europe to eat insects directly. But there is far more acceptance of the idea that we would consume animals who had been reared on insects as a protein source. Insects are, of course, a very natural part of the diet for poultry, who are insectivorous, and indeed pigs, as anyone who's remembers The Lion King or has watched it recently like I have knows. Timon and Pumbaa have a great lifestyle fueled by all sorts of tasty grubs found in the jungle. And not to mention, of course, the aquaculture sector, which is looking at the use of insects as an alternative or as a supplement to fish meal and soya as well. And it's a very natural part of the diet of particular species of fish, including salmon. So it's got huge potential.
Okay, Rachel, I'm sold. So say I was interested in participating in some form of insect farming myself right now. What opportunities are currently available?
I'm going to guess, do you mean financially rather than practically getting into a farm and getting amongst the bugs?
I think we should cover both, Chloe. I think maybe I've got a bit of money I want to invest and maybe I've got a bit of land. Why don't you start off, Chloe, with the investment side?
So on the investment side, and on the feed side, using insects to feed livestock, the regulatory framework, which I'm sure Rachel will go to talk about in a bit more detail, is still placing real restraints on the production opportunities. And that in turn creates risk in the uncertainty, but also really huge opportunities as an investor. So I think this market will definitely move. As Rachel said right at the beginning of this session, insect as feed and food is one part of a whole global shift in the way that we live and approach the sustainable economy and responsible living. And we've seen first market movers invest large sums of money in other elements of this green finance of the sustainable economy. I hope and I think we will see soon a private investment within the UK investing big sums of money into insect farming. That with it will bring confidence in other and smaller investors. So yeah, it will be exciting to see. It's happening outside of the UK. So we've seen big investments into France, within the US and other countries. I was listening to them this morning that said that the guy that plays Iron Man has invested a huge sum of money in a French insect farm, and he's fighting the good fight on this. As the regulation shifts and change, I think we'll see investors that have put money in at its infancy really realise big returns. But obviously with making investments at the early stage does bring a bit more risk because we don't know what will materialise with absolute certainty. Within the UK, it's still really early stage. We've seen some government public funding into startups, university spin-outs, but on the lower level. I mean, so in terms of just the sort of structure of a deal, it would work much the same as any other. You'd make an acquisition of shares into a business, but the value of the equity stake you take in that business is valued by, against the overall value of the business. And while it's still in its infancy, it's still such early stage, you're likely to get a really good valuation against a sort of startup scale-up business. So you put in your money and get a nice chunk out of that chunk of equity in that business. But as the regulation landscape changes and this scales up, you'll see your investment, your return really be quite significant. So while it is still really early stage and not at all mainstream, it's something that interests you and you've got some money to invest, it's a good opportunity because you're likely to get a decent chunk out of a business for a relatively small sum, and that back the right horse, and that scales up and evolves and you've got good stake in a good business.
Are we still at the stage where some government support is required and needed?
It's still happening. So yeah, there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of grant funding, a lot of public money that's being put into these types of businesses, which is really nice for an investor because it's undiluted funding. So you get the money put in by the government or other public body. It doesn't impact your interest in that business, but it shows that you've got the public purse almost backing and supporting what you're thinking is going to be a successful business as well. So yeah, that's absolutely happening. There's lots of initiatives out there, a lot of public money available. It's competitive to get it. It's high hurdles to get the grant, but it shows to the private investors that you've got a real credible business, that these organisations with the tough and high hurdles are backing. So it gives you comfort and confidence as an investor at the same time.
So we were talking to Ben Sharples earlier for another episode, and he said that he thought that investment in natural capital, because it's investment in nature, was inherently high risk. Would you place insects in the same category, Chloe, or do you think that they've got a better risk profile?
I think they've probably got a better risk profile. I think what we'll start to see, and actually we're already seeing, I was having a search this morning and there are, I think, 37 startups in the tech and AI insect farming space at the moment. So I think what we'll see is investment into tech that can speed up the efficiency of insect farming, but can also pivot in case it doesn't take off in the trajectory that we all hope, so that when the regulation does catch up with people that have been talking about this for a long time, there'll be real effective tech and efficiencies in place to scale up the manufacturing and the production of insects as a produce very rapidly. And then that will start tipping the balance in terms of the expenditure for other sources of feed protein versus insects. But I think it probably adapt to climate change more than nature can if you're banking on particular habitat evolutions and realising the value in those. Nature or insect farming probably can pivot and adapt to changing in the environment more so than nature, or more quicker.
I completely agree with that, Chloe. I think that the potential for the development and the upscaling of the industry is huge. And to the extent that you can farm insects, well, with very little land, very little water, and with a good renewable energy source, means that you can do it anywhere. Entocycle are one of the leading pioneers in this area, and they farm insects under London Bridge. This is something that can be deployed where it is needed. It is incredibly adaptable. The technology is really pioneering, and I think that once we grasp the regulatory side of this, the opportunities will really be unleashed, and there'll be lots of people looking to invest, because it just makes sense. It just makes so much sense in terms of all the aspects of the circular economy. It is such a great solution to a number of problems, not just protein, but ensuring that you don't lose valuable nutrition, ensuring that you have a good, safe processing for what would otherwise be waste, a source of nutrition. It's such a great industry that really does need the right support to be able to grow and reach its potential.
Perhaps you could just talk us through what an insect farming enterprise might look like. I mean, do I rent 3 hectares of ground and release a load of black soldier fly on there and hope that they make some larvae, or how does it work?
I suspect that there'll be certain organisations that have something to say about that. Definitely don't do that. I mean, we think about it in terms of the food side. So there are, some organisations based in the UK who are producing highly nutritious food for human consumption and super tasty. And then there is the feed side. So there are companies in the UK who are producing food for the aquaculture industry, the pet food industry. And there are those companies who are setting up to supply insect larvae for those purposes. So there is a company that selectively breeds insects for certain traits so that they are perfectly equipped for whichever industry they are intended for. So there are different opportunities and different ways that you could get involved, not to mention chitin, which is a component of the exoskeleton of insects, which is used or has the potential to be used in pharmaceuticals as an alternative to plastic. So that in itself is a very interesting opportunity for the industry as well.
So, Rachel, what is the scale of these projects, though? I mean, you've spoken a little bit about land use and so on, but how much land do you need, and what's the scalability of these projects?
So in the UK, we have organisations that are doing this, selling equipment so that people can rear insects in their homes for consumption. So small pods that you would have in your kitchen, you would feed vegetable waste that, and you would grow your own larvae, and you could have that, right through to organisations that are establishing funding to have a scaled up operation to produce insect larvae in terms of tons rather than a smaller scale. It's not really about the land mass, because insect farming is more akin to vertical farming. You can do it in many different places. You don't need that much land. You need a really good, efficient system. And often you need the right technology to be able to do it. And you need the right energy source to be able to create the right habitat for the insects to breed. So it's very versatile, and you can get started now, Adam. We'll send you a box for the kitchen. I'm sure the kids would love it.
I'm also right in saying that it's quite low in energy consumption compared to other forms of farming. Actually, while you need a reliable source of energy, it's quite low in its actual consumption of energy. So it's a bit more.
Sorry, Chloe. I was just going to say, I think that you need to have the right temperature for optimized breeding. And so, the energy source, as you said, the reliability of the energy source is key. And you need to be able to have the ability to control the temperature so that the insects are comfortable and that you have the right environment for them.
But it emits a lot. I was just really emits a lot less, I think 100 times less climate impacting emissions than other forms of farming.
If you compare it to, the equivalent amount of protein that you would produce for cows in particular, you emit significantly less carbon emissions, use significantly less water and significantly less land. And of course, you can rear them on what would otherwise be, provided it's within the regulations, what would otherwise be potentially, vegetable waste.
Rachel, what does the future look like for insect farming? What are the developing opportunities?
I think one of the most interesting things about this sector is the ability to attach an insect farm to a byproduct source. So if you were a farmer, for example, and you had a particular crop or byproduct, for example, vegetables that for whatever reason were not able to go into the food chain, that you could deploy this. There are companies that have trailers that they can deploy to farms in order to ensure that nutrition in that vegetable byproduct. I'm avoiding saying the word waste, because if it's waste, you can't use it as an insect substrate. But effectively, that's what we're talking about, the ability to deploy these units, as they are in some instances, to be able to harness that waste and turn it into high quality protein. Eventually, what we hope is that farmers will be able to do that it will all be really intelligently done, and then they can use that to feed, for example, their poultry or pigs on the farm. So it's really circular, it's really local. So that's certainly one opportunity. Another opportunity, really relates to producing this at a much more centralized, large scale, where you're then probably producing ground insect meal for use as part of aquaculture feed. There are already a lot of opportunities in the pet food industry where it's being used as a hypoallergenic pet food because of its qualities and because it can be much more gentle on the stomachs of certain animals than traditional food. So that in of itself is a considerable market that's being exploited, particularly in Europe. And I would certainly hope that we would follow recent changes in European legislation, for example, that permit the use of insect meal in pig and poultry feed. That will be a significant indicator to the industry that the government recognises the key role that insects have to play in providing an alternative, safe protein source. So I think that we will have a legislative change, we will have policy support, and that will really enable insect producers to make the most of the opportunities and to really fill a gap in the provision of protein in our feed sector. And then on the food side, that is an important role to play. There are lots of people who have concerns with protein sources that we currently have available, who want a nutritious, sustainable alternative source of protein and are happy, to consume insects directly and see that as a great alternative to plant protein or as a supplement to plant protein and alternative to meat.
Rachel, what is insect farming going to look like in 5 years' time? What's your hope?
I think we will have many, many systems deployed across the UK, small and large, that there will be on-farm insect farms attached to traditional farms, partnerships, collaborations, use of energy and use of farm buildings and other resources to really make this happen. And then we will be using it in aquaculture, in particular, and eventually I suspect there may well be provision in the legislation to use it as a source of protein and nutrition in cattle feed as well. So the next 5 years are going to be incredibly interesting. We have a very robust food security system in terms of making sure that our food and feed is safe. That's really important to us. That's really important to consumers. And I think that that is a great way of protecting us and also the insect protein industry. And we need to work within those regulations and amend them where needed. And then it will provide assurances to people that the use of insect protein is safe and nutritious and that the right risks have been identified if there are some, for example, in terms of allergies, which is often akin to shellfish allergies because of the exoskeletons that insects have. So we're already doing such a lot of work to ensure that we understand any potential risks, and the legislation will only be amended when we fully understand, which we have at a European level already, the benefits as against the risks of using insect protein.
just to follow on, I totally agree. I think we're going to see more tech and innovation startups and scale-ups move into space. They're increasingly very purpose-led and they're identifying clean tech need, then this will fall within the same camp. So I think we'll see more businesses in that space start to build out the tech capabilities to really scale up this effectively. And once the regulation and the policy does fall into place, and then to be utilised in the manufacturing market just to the scale that then will be needed to combat some of the climate change issues that we've already talked about.
Great. We marched through that pretty quickly. Do you think there's any other content that we should be putting in?
I mean, I think that we could have a whole other podcast on the benefits of farming insects that don't fall under protein. But it was very much in my mind after last week we had the Insects as Feed and Food conference, which we are very pleased to partner with the Royal Entomological Society on. We've been helping and contributing to that conference for 6 years now. And every time we go, there is a really interesting development and research being undertaken on some key solutions that insects are providing. And last week we heard about the use of chitin, particularly in terms of an alternative to plastics and the research that's being done to compare it to that. There are lots of other uses for chitin in the pharmaceutical industry as well, but I thought that that was a really interesting development given that it's yet another solution that we're looking to insects for. And if we are able to develop an efficient way of farming insects to solve many, many solutions, then it just adds to the viability of that industry. One thing springs to mind, which we hadn't touched on, but is definitely a theme, which is at the forefront of the mind of the industry, is the issue of insect welfare and insect sentience. And it's something that the industry is, researching and making sure that we fully understand, and that there would be practices and procedures in place to ensure that there is the right environment created for insects in the same way that we do for other farmed animals. I think that's a really important topic, one that we are likely to explore in some detail in the next conference, and one that's becoming quite interesting from a legislative point of view, given that we have relatively recently had the Animal Sentience Welfare Act passed, which has started to recognise the sentience of some invertebrates. So that's an interesting topic that I think we certainly will be watching very closely.
For the uninitiated, how does the law currently treat insects? Are they treated as not being sentient and therefore not subject to the same welfare standards as mammals, for instance?
Yeah, I think the law has been relatively silent because we simply haven't been farming insects in this way in the UK and Europe previously. So whilst insects fall under the definition of farmed animals in feed legislation, for example, they are not yet listed in the recent animal welfare sentience bill. And I think that we will probably see developments on research to show that either way there is some level of, for example, feeling pain and discomfort, which will mean that it's appropriate to have regulations which recognise that and ensure that insects that are being farmed have the right environment and are not subjected to pain or discomfort in the same way that we would do that for livestock.
In terms of insect farming practices as they are now, is it currently the case that that's inevitable and a substantial change would need to be made to farming practices to meet those potential new obligations?
No, I mean, having visited several insect farms now, the optimal conditions for insects are clearly key to the success of the business. They're entirely aligned. If you have insects who have the right environment, the right feed, so the right substrate, the right temperature, the right humidity, all of which is really closely monitored and optimized, that's key, for example, to insects growing at a particular rate, breeding at a particular rate. So the welfare of the insects and the environment that they're reared in is absolutely key to the success of the industry. And there has been an awful lot of research in how that can be done most efficiently and to the best interests of the insects. So I don't have concerns about that. I think that what we need to ensure is that as the industry grows, that those are managed properly and that we are able to point to regulations or guidance which sets that out clearly so that there's no confusion about it.
Well, thank you ever so much, Chloe and Rachel. I've only got one more thing to ask you both. Chloe, I believe you're not coming to Cereals, so I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. But first I'll ask Rachel, what are you most looking forward to about your attendance at the Cereals event this year?
I'm very much looking forward to wandering around on a field outside without having to wonder where my 2 children are, and lots of chatting to people, and quite excited about seeing various members from our team tuck into the insect offerings that we'll be having. So yeah, it's going to be a great event, lots of things to see and chat about. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And Chloe, if I was to bring one thing back from Cereals for you, what would that be?
I think I'd quite like to see a mini insect farm attached to the cafe in Exeter's Michelmore office. And then we could just pump the waste into there
It's
and
not
feed the
waste,
out
Chloe.
the vegetable byproduct to the mini beast and see this in action.
I'm very much up for that.
We'll work on that. Well, thank you very much.